when you actually get to the randomized trial, of course, there are lots of benefits from having done the PES beforehand. So you can get the question agreed, you can do power calculations, you can use the learning curve data, but most importantly, you can get consensus. Preferences, preferences, preferences. These are the hardest things in doing randomized trials in surgery. As I was saying to one of you earlier, I've found a psychologist once who can measure tolerance of uncertainty. And we did a paper together comparing 1,000 surgeons and 1,000 physicians to see how tolerant they were of uncertainty. And no surprises there. Surgeons were much more intolerant of uncertainty. You ask them a question, is it A or B? And they go, it's B. You ask the physicians, they go, well, let's do some reading on this. So that's what makes it difficult for us to do trials. We also asked them how much they approved of randomized trials, and they motherhood and apple pie, just the same as everybody else. They thought they were brilliant. They just never met anyone they could randomize. So this is the problem. How do you get around it? Well, I think Jane Blaisley is going to be talking to you later, who's done a lot of good work on this. One of the ways is going back to the patient and asking them what they care about. Another is to use decision aids, algorithms, or third parties, i.e. research nurses, to actually talk to the patient about the trial and do the randomization and consent with them. Because they can tell what you want and what you think, even if you're trying to speak the words on the sheet and try and look objective. And we've got good examples of why that works and how that works. If you're really stuck and you can't get around the preferences, you can do expertise-based randomization, i.e. you randomize the patient to surgeon A, who always does operation A, or surgeon B, who always does operation B. Then there are sort of more desperate measures. You can do parallel cohort groups if all the patients are refusing to be randomized. There was a nice example of that in the reflux study in the BMJ last year. It's worked well. And there's this thing called a step wedge design, where basically everybody gets the treatment eventually, but the step wedges, they get randomized as to how late in the trial they get it. Stage 4 I'm not going to talk about. That's what you do in the long term. But how does all this help you? Well, hopefully, I'd recommend everybody reads the sort of ideal papers. It helps appreciate the need for preliminary studies before you go straight to a randomized trial, and the issues that those studies need to deal with. So tinkering, learning curves, and getting consensus. And if you understand the potential for these types of studies, prospective development and prospective exploration studies, you can use them. And we are hoping to work with groups like yourselves to develop the recommendations. Now, you'll remember the sort of slide with the old guy with the beard on it. That's there to remind me that the recommendations themselves are not evidence-based. They're based on a consensus conference of experts, which if you look up, the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine is evidence level 4. So how do we get the evidence that this really works rather than being good common sense? We get it from experience of doing it in practice with people like yourselves. And what we'd like to do is develop these studies so that we can then, using qualitative research methods like sitting down and interviewing you and saying, how was it for you, refine our recommendations and make them better. I just want to talk for a few minutes now, because I'm nearly done, about how IDEAL has kind of grown in unexpected directions. So it's become quite important in devices and commissioning, and potentially also in surveillance of patient safety. We never thought about devices when we were at the Balliol collaboration, but actually the regulatory authorities read the papers and thought, oh, this is interesting, because we've got a problem. As many of you probably know, there is a problem both in the European Union and in the US, in that our current legislation for letting medical devices onto the market doesn't protect the public against devices hitting the market, even quite invasive ones sometimes, that have never had any clinical trials. That sounds amazing, but it's true. That's been heavily criticised, and the regulatory authorities are looking for ways to fix that. And the IDEAL recommendations look to them like a potentially good solution. You know, companies developing devices hate the idea of doing randomized trials. It's very expensive. But what the FDA in particular are looking at is a kind of graded market approval, where if you're going to do a prospective development study, well, you can sell the device to the hospitals that are involved in that. If you're going to do a prospective exploration study, you can sell the device to the hospitals that are providing that evidence. And then if you're going to do a randomized trial, the people in the trial can get the device. And only once the trial is done, everybody can get the device, which makes a lot more sense to me. So that's the way they're thinking, but they're still in discussions and there's a lot of political flack flying around it. And the MHRA are also quite interested in this. You can see why they're interested if you think about the commonalities between surgery and devices, but there are some obvious differences as well. Most of the work on tinkering is actually done before the device ever gets to human. It's easier to define the procedure, and most of the time there's only one company involved, so there's none of this surgical argument going on. So we may have to refine the ideal framework specifically for devices, and we're currently doing a study to see if we can get consensus on what that would look like. Likewise, commissioners are interested in ideal because they're constantly being asked to pay for things that nobody's ever produced any good evidence for. And in hard economic times, they're a bit leery about that. And again, the ideal framework, particularly the prospective development and prospective exploration study formats, look to them like a useful intervention one might do as a halfway house to suggesting everybody does that. That's true. Amongst the other things the ideal collaboration does is that we have a kind of movement going to try and improve the environment for surgical trials. As I've said a lot about why the problem is us, but it actually, as you know, it's not just us. There are people who could make the environment for surgical research much better. So journal editors who could promote the ideal reporting and design standards and develop registries by supporting registry publications. Funders who could provide specific funding for PDS and PDS studies. And I would point out that the HTA in particular have shown specific interest in this and have approving words on their website. They've probably funded one or two ideal-based studies, but not so many yet. They approve in principle, and we're working on them. And if they demanded evidence of benefit for new techniques and linked funding to adequate scientific evaluation, we'd be getting somewhere. Regulators, likewise, we've really talked about the FDA already, and professional societies are very important as well. But if the guidelines for research explicitly support the ideal model, then we'll be getting somewhere. So these are some of the advocacy campaigns we're doing at the moment. I mentioned the Western Man stuff already, coverage of evidence, and one of my ambitions is to see case series decline dramatically in the literature and be replaced by better designed prospective studies of the type I've talked about. And so these are the things we're doing at the moment. If you're interested, please do join us. It's easy, it's free. But more importantly today, the message is we really want to partner with people who are actively doing trials and audits, because as you've listened, you must have realised that you could call an ideal stage 2B study an audit and support our advocacy campaigns. And I'm probably out of time, so I'm going to stop there with the plug for ideal.